Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we are looking at a really just a fascinating framework developed by a group called GloryGlobal.
Yeah, it's a great piece of research.
It really is. And it's centered on this concept they call preparing for the life journey and basically auditing what might be missing from your life portfolio. Because, usually when we talk about financial planning, there's this weird expectation of absolute certainty.
Right, the perfect spreadsheet.
Exactly. You look at point A, you trace the line to point B, and you just sort of assume the map maker gave you a clean, totally predictable route to follow. But, stepping into the actual reality of living means dealing with a landscape that just constantly shifts.
Oh, absolutely. And we live in an era of just unprecedented information overload when it comes to personal finance. The whole discourse is dominated by, stock tips, crypto analysis, real estate leverage strategies.
Extreme frugality, too. Don't buy the coffee.
Right, exactly. And it creates this chaotic environment where people focus so intensely on these specific little tactics while entirely neglecting their overarching structural resilience. So today, we are cutting through all that noise to look at a fundamental disconnect between how we mathematically model our money and how life actually unfolds in practice.
Yeah, and so to set the stage for you, the listener, I really want to pose the core question from our source material today. I want you to think about your own setup for a second. Does your financial portfolio actually have everything you need for life?
That's the big one.
Yeah, and not just for an optimal, spreadsheet perfect scenario, but for actual messy, completely unpredictable life.
It forces a hard audit of your current assumptions, really, because to understand the utility of a life portfolio, we first have to, we have to deconstruct the default mode most of us operate within.
Good, what exactly?
Well, the source material highlights that the vast majority of people anchor their entire financial existence to just one single variable, and that's income.
Ah, right. The narrative that's just drilled into us from day one. Acquire a skill, work really hard, generate a high income, and passively save whatever is left over.
Precisely. We treat our earning capacity as the ultimate safety net.
Yeah, we project our current income or our expected trajectory of raises infinitely into the future. It's what you could call the straight line fallacy.
What's fascinating here is the psychology behind that straight line forecasting. Human beings are just notoriously bad at predicting exponential changes or sudden chaotic disruptions.
Because it's easier to just assume tomorrow looks like today, right?
Exactly. We extrapolate our current reality forward because it requires a lot less cognitive load. But the financial journey simply does not operate on a linear track.
It really doesn't.
Life bends, it fractures, and it introduces exogenous shocks.
Yeah.
Macroeconomic downturns, sudden health crises, maybe shifting family care obligations, things that disrupt that income variable overnight.
I look at this approach kind of like packing for a brutal cross-country road trip by solely focusing on the fuel tank.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, your income is the gas. You fill the tank, you feel that momentum, and you hit the highway at 80 miles an hour. But you haven't checked the transmission, you have no spare tire, and you didn't even pack a physical map for when the GPS inevitably loses signal.
You're just blindly driving.
Right. You have incredible forward momentum, but absolutely zero mechanical resilience. So the moment you hit a blown-out tire, your forward progress doesn't just slow down, it violently stops. So what does this all mean for the listener who thinks they are doing everything right just by working hard and earning a paycheck?
Well, in those moments of sudden disruption, your financial architecture enters a binary state.
Meaning what?
Meaning the universe does not care about your historical work ethic or your future earning potential. You are either structurally prepared to absorb the shock or you are completely exposed. The source demands a psychological shift, really, away from the mere act of earning and toward the state of being prepared.
Let me play devil's advocate here, though, because I think a lot of people listening are already nodding along thinking, well, I know all this, which is why I have a massive emergency fund and a maxed out 401k.
Sure, the standard advice.
Right. We are taught that having cash in the bank and a standard retirement account means you are a responsible adult.
Wait, aren't we always told a savings account is the ultimate safety net? Isn't having cash in the bank enough?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, relying heavily on a singular tool like a massive cash reserve introduces profound capital inefficiency.
Oh, because of inflation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Cash provides liquidity, but holding an outsized cash position subjects you to a severe inflation drag over time. Your purchasing power just erodes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But more importantly, treating a savings account as your only defense mechanism creates a single point of failure. The GloryGlobal source explicitly notes that relying on one or two financial tools leaves a massive structural gap. And that gap is precisely where financial stress takes root. So rather than just a massive pile of cash acting as a blunt instrument, we need an actual system.
A coordinated system, yes.
Right, because if a single tool breaks under multidirectional pressure, like dealing with a sudden medical bill while simultaneously losing your primary income stream, that cash pile vanishes fast. So what does an actual functional system look like?
It looks like compartmentalization. A robust financial strategy has to feature multiple layers interacting synergistically rather than just a disorganized collection of accounts you've accumulated over the last decade.
Okay, so layers.
Yes. The GloryGlobal text identifies 4 specific layers required for a comprehensive life portfolio. Let's break down the mechanics. The first layer is protection.
Meaning, what happens when the primary engine, your income, seizes up entirely? We aren't just talking about a dip in the market, we're talking about a full stop of cash flow.
Precisely. Protection is about risk transfer. It involves utilizing tools that provide immediate liquidity and income replacement without requiring you to cannibalize your other assets.
Okay, got it.
The second layer is growth.
Which addresses the inflation drag you mentioned earlier. You can't just hoard capital, it has to compound. The money have to capture market momentum to outpace the rising cost of living.
Exactly. Now, the third layer is planning. This is the structural blueprint. It involves tax efficiency, understanding the sequence of returns risk, and knowing the exact sequence in which you will deploy your assets during different life phases.
Wait, hold on. Planning sounds like a verb. How is that a distinct structural layer in a portfolio? That just sounds like the act of managing the other 3 layers.
It's a fair point, but in this framework, planning is the connective tissue. If growth is the engine and protection is the airbag, planning is the onboard computer system dictating how they interact.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's the formalized strategy of asset location. Knowing which types of assets are held in taxable versus tax-advantaged accounts, and the predetermined rules for rebalancing when your life circumstances change, it transforms random financial acts into a cohesive mechanism.
That makes a lot of sense.
Which brings us to the fourth layer, future security.
Okay, I have to stop you again, because protection and future security sound like the exact same thing to me. How are those conceptually different? If my money is protected, isn't my future secure?
It is a common conflation, but mechanically they serve entirely different timelines and risk profiles. Protection is your immediate shock absorption.
Like a buffer.
Right. It's the disability insurance, the liquid cash buffer, the immediate defense against a sudden job loss today. Future security, on the other hand, is about establishing a permanent baseline floor for your later years.
Oh, so it's a long-term play.
Exactly. It's about mitigating longevity risk, which is the very real danger of simply outliving your money. Future security involves uncorrelated assets or guaranteed income streams that cannot be wiped out by a severe market downturn in the year you decide to retire.
I love that distinction.
Think of it this way. Protection gets you through the storm. Future security ensures you have a permanent place to live once the storm passes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about how these 4 layers rely on each other mechanically, almost like the anatomy of a house.
Okay, let's hear it.
So let's say growth is the foundation and the framing. It takes time to build, it relies on compounding, and it elevates your net worth over time. And protection is the roof. Now, if you have an incredible multi-million-dollar foundation of growth assets, stocks, real estate, but you neglected to build the roof of protection, you are heavily exposed.
Severely exposed.
Right. If a massive storm hits, say a severe medical crisis that keeps you out of work for 2 years, and you don't have protection, what happens? How do we stop treating these like random accounts and actually make them work as a single ecosystem?
Well, if you don't have that roof, you are forced into premature liquidation.
Yes. You have to start ripping the copper wiring out of your own walls just to pay for the storm damage. You liquidate your growth assets, potentially during a bear market, which triggers massive tax penalties and locks and losses. Your foundation crumbles because the roof wasn't there to shield it. The tools have to protect one another.
That structural interdependence is the core thesis of the source text. And yet, looking at the average portfolio, most people have half a roof, a sprawling but highly leveraged foundation, absolutely no blueprint, and they are just hoping the weather holds out forever.
It's terrifying when you put it like that.
Yeah.
So how do we actually fix this? How do we cross the chasm from holding a random assortment of accounts to actually operating this four-layered ecosystem?
Through aggressive intentionality.
Intentionality.
Yes. The text implicitly argues that real financial security is not an accidental byproduct of a high salary. You do not just stumble into a perfectly balanced life portfolio by guessing. You have to actively audit your setup.
You have to look at the roof.
Right. You must look at the roof and mathematically verify its structural integrity against your current liabilities. Furthermore, your ecosystem must be dynamic. The capital allocation that served you at 25 will inherently fail you at 45. It must adapt as your life evolves.
But implementing that four-layer framework, understanding the mechanics of liquidity, yield, risk transfer, and longevity, it requires people to face a reality they actively try to ignore.
Human nature strongly prefers the illusion of a controlled environment.
We really do. We desperately want to believe that bad things only happen to other people. But the uncomfortable truth that this material forces us to confront is that it is never about if life will radically alter your trajectory.
No, it's not.
It is entirely about when.
When you operate under the assumption of if, you build contingencies. When you operate under the reality of when, you build infrastructure.
Oh, that's a great way to phrase it. And when that unpredictable moment finally arrives, the domino effect is just utterly brutal for the unprepared. It was rarely an isolated financial event.
It cascades.
Exactly. A sudden loss of income forces you to drain the inefficient cash reserves. Once the cash is gone, you resort to high-interest, unsecured debt. That debt acts as a parasite on your future cash flow, which means you have to halt your contributions to the growth layer.
Which derails everything.
Yeah. Suddenly, a short-term crisis has permanently delayed or destroyed your 30-year retirement timeline. It's a complete cascade failure.
This raises an important question, and it brings us to what might be the most profound psychological insight within the GloryGlobal framework. When those cascade failures happen, people tend to internalize the destruction.
They really do. The shame is overwhelming. I mean, people feel like they failed. Is this really just a symptom of people being careless or bad with money? I was speaking with a colleague recently who went through a devastating medical issue a few years back. He had to liquidate a significant portion of his 401k to stay afloat.
That's tough.
The financial hit was terrible, but the emotional burden was worse. He felt like a complete moral failure. He kept agonizing over small purchases he made years prior, thinking, if I hadn't bought that nicer car, if I hadn't taken that vacation, I would have had the cash to survive this. He viewed his financial ruin as a direct result of his own character flaws.
And that is a tragically common reaction. We are heavily conditioned by society to equate financial struggle with moral bankruptcy, to assume that if your portfolio fails, it is because you were frivolous, undisciplined, or lazy.
Right.
But the source text brilliantly dismantles that narrative. It removes the moral judgment entirely and reframes the crisis. It shifts the blame from a personal failure of character or carelessness to a structural failure of architecture.
Oh, wow. So it is not that you were a bad driver who deserved to crash. It is that you drove a vehicle with summer tires into a blizzard. The equipment failed because it was deployed in the wrong environment.
That is the exact distinction. If your entire portfolio consists of a high-yield savings account and an employer-sponsored retirement plan, and you are financially decimated by an extended illness, you didn't fail because you bought a coffee every morning.
Right. The avocado toast didn't ruin you.
Exactly. You failed because your portfolio lacked the mechanical protection layer required to absorb a medical shock without liquidating your growth assets. Understanding that the failure is structural rather than moral is incredibly liberating.
It fundamentally changes the required response. If the failure is moral, the only response is to feel shame and try to punish yourself through extreme deprivation. But if the failure is structural, you just need a better blueprint.
Yes.
You can look at the damage analytically and say, okay, the system broke here because I lacked uncorrelated income streams.
Yeah.
Let's go build that specific mechanism. It turns emotional panic into actionable, objective awareness.
Which perfectly transitions into the practical application for you, the listener. Grasping the theory of compartmentalization, understanding the mechanical difference between protection and future security, and absolving yourself of past financial shame are all critical psychological steps.
But you have to actually do something with it.
Right. Theory must eventually dictate action.
So we have to return to that initial question. But this time with the full context of the straight line fallacy and the four-layer framework in mind. Look at your own setup right now. with ruthless objectivity. Does your portfolio truly possess everything you need for the life you are building?
It's a tough question to answer, honestly.
It is. Have you engineered a protection layer that transfers risk? Do you have a growth layer capturing momentum? Is there a formal planning structure dictating asset location? And have you established the baseline future security to mitigate longevity risk?
Given the default financial path most of us are placed on, the honest answer for a significant portion of the audience is going to be no. There would be glaring structural vulnerabilities.
And if the answer is no, lean into that powerful reframe we just discussed. Identifying a missing layer is not an admission of failure.
Not at all.
It is the acquisition of awareness. You cannot fix a critical vulnerability in the foundation until you're willing to turn the lights on in the basement and acknowledge the cracks. Awareness is where change begins.
And for those who recognize those cracks and are looking to transition from a disorganized collection of tools into a cohesive strategy, the source material does offer a concrete resource. As impartial analysts of the text, it's worth noting that GloryGlobal provides a mechanism to get a professional second opinion on your current financial architecture and build a life-fitting plan.
Yeah, we always want to make sure you have direct access to the tools referenced in the research. The material encourages listeners to reach out for an audit to help build a plan that actually aligns with the chaotic reality of life. You can send a message with the word plan, or you can schedule a free consultation directly.
It's a very straightforward process.
They provided a specific link in the source document, which is a Google form. For those taking notes or wanting to bookmark it, the URL is forms.gle/JER JBN J2NCH A9HB 6HY6.
Utilizing a resource like that is a low-stakes method to step off the straight-line trajectory and begin formally layering your preparation.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. Something that really synthesizes this theme of constant adjustment and facing reality.
If a true financial strategy is fundamentally designed to adjust and adapt as your life evolves, you need to ask yourself this question. When was the last time your money actually updated its resume to match the person you are today?
Has your money updated its resume? Man, think about that. The capital allocation that made sense for the person you were a decade ago, with different liabilities, different health metrics, and different goals, is dangerously obsolete today.
It's operating on old data.
Exactly. If your financial map is based on a 10-year-old survey of the landscape, you cannot be surprised when you inevitably drive straight into a swamp.
You need an architecture that reflects the actual terrain you're standing on today, with built-in mechanisms to handle the inevitable earthquakes of tomorrow.
Stop relying on the gas tank alone. Build the structural layers. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.